Hello, thank you for your interest in learning about transgender students in post-secondary education. First, a little about ourselves. My name is Gillian Dauer, my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a first-year HESA student here at IU Bloomington. I attended Rutgers University in New Brunswick for undergrad, and my assistantship is with residential programs and services as a graduate supervisor.
And my name is Bekka Zawisza. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I went to Central Michigan University for my undergrad. I'm also a first year in the HESA program, and I also work with residential programs and services as a graduate supervisor in Wright Quad.
We first want to give you a sense of who we're talking about. Transgender students are a diverse student population in higher ed. There are approximately 218,000 transgender students ages 18 to 40 in the United States, making up about 1.7% of the undergraduate and graduate student population. It's important to remember when discussing the student population that these numbers only reflect the students willing to disclose their identity. There are likely more transgender students in higher education. As we will discuss and continue to remind you, the term transgender covers a wide range of identities, including but not limited to non-binary, genderqueer, agender, gender fluid, and gender nonconforming. Trans people hold multiple intersecting identities across race, ethnicity, age, disability, religion, class, nationality, and gender.
So some relevant terms for working with this population include the term transgender, which is an umbrella term for people whose gender identity differs from the sex that they were assigned at birth. Throughout this presentation, we will abbreviate this term to trans. Cisgender is an umbrella term for someone who identifies with a gender identity that corresponds to the sex that they were identified at birth. Transphobia is the fear and hatred of trans people. Misgendering is the use of a pronoun, honorific, or term that is incorrect for a person. And dead naming is when a person uses a birth or legal name for a trans person rather than the person's chosen name.
Now, some of the current issues impacting transgender students. We chose to focus on 3 impact areas concerning transgender students, each with deep historical context and currently changing landscapes. First, mental and physical health care. Transgender students report more serious mental health indicators than their cisgender peers. This is in reference to suicidal ideation and self-harm. Notably, transgender students exhibit more resiliency against minor mental health indicators, like feeling overwhelmed and burnout. Some student health insurances and some student health centers cover trans-specific counseling, hormone therapy, and other gender-affirming healthcare. The frequency of gendering and dead naming in healthcare environments leads students to avoid healthcare, which increases the risk of depression. Healthcare access also differs by each state as policies change, so it's important for higher education professionals to stay informed on their state laws. Next is Title IX. Amendments to Title IX under the Biden administration would include and protect the rights of transgender students. These amendments were first introduced by the Obama administration, but neglected under the Trump administration. Under President Biden, Title IX policy would allow trans students to use facilities that correspond with their gender identity, prohibit bullying based on gender identity, and ensure students are referred to with the correct pronouns. This leads us to our third impact area, since these amendments do not address college athletics, leaving the sector to determine its own stance. In January of 2022, the NCAA Board of Governors voted for a sport-by-sport approach to transgender participation, following either the policies of their national governing board or the international policies of their sport. This follows the lead of the Olympic Committee. Since then, each sport has issued statements addressing their stances and policies, including things like regular testosterone testing.
To discuss transgender students' collegiate experiences, we focused on 2 aspects of higher education co-curriculars, LGBTQ+ resource centers and Greek life. According to the studies we found, involvement in LGBTQ+ resource centers positively impacts students' collegiate experiences. However, we have found that there are not enough fully funded LGBTQ+ resource centers at higher education institutions across the country, including the fact that only about 4% of the nation's degree-granting institutions have professionally staffed centers. The second facet of collegiate experience that we explored was Greek life, as this is a highly gendered co-curricular activity. We were unable to find recent experiences of solely transgender individuals in Greek life, but we were able to find an article addressing the relationship of the LGBTQ+ community as a whole to Greek life. This article discussed that the individual students are often welcomed into Greek life culture, but that the experiences that they have while in Greek life vary distinctly between institution and even from organization to organization, as Greek life culture is vastly different depending on the institution and the national governing board. We also found that transgender students who are welcomed in these spaces often feel isolated as they are going through the struggles that come with being a gender minority alone, as there is not a large enough population of trans students in Greek life. Finally, the article suggested that Greek life needs to acknowledge the past and current struggles of LGBTQ plus individuals in higher education in order to welcome these students into their organizations. We also found that there are LGBTQ plus friendly Greek organizations like Gamma Rho Lambda. Finally, this graph to the left addresses the prevalence of barriers to educational attainment for transgender students in comparison to cisgender LGBTQ students. As you can see, transgender students are more frequently impacted by these barriers, such as harassment and bullying, than their cisgender LGBTQ peers.
Research and studies on trans collegiate experiences often focus on white transgender student experiences. As we've discussed, this is far from true to the lived experiences of transgender college students who hold a variety of identities. Transgender students with multiple intersecting identities face different and more intense racial and gender discrimination, resulting in more severe mental and physical health outcomes. Yet, these students do not feel represented within or supported by the racial or ethnic cultural spaces or the LGBTQ plus spaces on campus. These spaces historically have provided safe developmental spaces for diverse college students.
For the issues of development for this population, higher education introduces opportunities for independence. This allows students to explore and express their gender identity in ways that they have not previously been able to due to the culture of secondary education or their family structure. Another potential issue when examining development from a practitioner's lens is the issue that gender development theory is often only written from the perspective of the trans umbrella and not individualized to the other identities covered within the scope of trans. This means that these students and their supporters might not have as clear of paths traced for them that are specific to their development. For the implications and strategies for higher education practitioners, it is important that we understand the strategies to support transgender students. We have 4 strategies for working with these students. First, dismantling preconceived biases when working with trans students, like the trans as tragic trope. We recommend that practitioners work alongside trans students to do this for themselves and others. Second, it is important that as practitioners, we recognize the role that we can play in supporting the resilience of transgender students through taking actions to be part of their support network. These can be as simple as using the proper name and pronouns for the student. Third, it is recommended that advisors adopt the transgender gaze, which is a lens through which we look with the trans person rather than at them to see the world through their eyes. This increases the level of empathy that advisors and professionals can have in their interactions with trans students. Finally, we recommend that all offices provide tangible resources for all transgender students that are culturally competent, inclusive, relevant, and well-informed. This will help acknowledge the intersecting identities of trans students and help them feel seen and supported across campus. The graph to the right addresses the percentage of trans students who used and found inclusive resources, such as gender inclusive housing, to be useful during their collegiate experience. For implications, we understand that there is not enough research and scholarship on the general transgender student experience. We also recommend more research into the intersections of the trans identity with other identities that the student may hold, such as race, religion, and class.
It's important to fully capture the experiences of transgender students, and it's impossible to do that in this brief presentation. So we encourage you to read more and find ways to apply this knowledge to your own work. On our executive brief, you will find a list of references and recommended resources pertaining to the student population. A few we found particularly useful were educational experiences of transgender people from the UCLA School of Law Williams Institute, Supporting Success for LGBTQ students, Tools for Inclusive Campus Practices by Cindy Ann Kilgo, Advising Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, and Queer College Students by Craig McGill and Jennifer Jocelyn, Our University Health Services Meeting the Needs of Transgender College Students, A Qualitative Assessment of a Public University by Santos, Mann, and Pfeiffer, and Don't Say Sorry, Do Better, Trans Students of Color, Disidentification, and Internet Futures by Sims, Nicolazzo, and Jones. Thank you very much for listening. We hope you leave here feeling more knowledgeable and prepared for working with these students.